Hey, peace. What's happening, everyone? On our deal with.
Recognize royalty. Recognize royalty. Gotta recognize it. Recognize royalty. Like they ain't got eyes to recognize royalty.
So one of the main talking points of FBA, and one of their favorite talking points, is that Black immigrants are tethers because it was FBA that made it possible for them to come here. But then once they got here, they started to undermine FBA. And so they feel as if the reason they should not be undermined is because they're the ones that made it possible for us to come here. And so that's what they use to say that we are hypocrites in a way, backstabbers in a way. We come here on, because they're here. We were able to come here because they're the ones who fought for the 1965 Immigration Act, that it was their civil rights movement, and that Immigration Act came as a result of the civil rights movement, and that it was on their backs that 1965 Immigration Act was passed. And so they feel that, we kind of owe them something as a result of that, because it's their work that allowed us to get here. So I guess I wanted to kind of study about that a little bit more, read a little more about the 1965 Act, and see whether or not there's any validity to that talking point, which is one of their main talking points. So we're going to see how well it stands up to scrutiny. So I asked ChatGPT to speak about the 1965 Immigration Act, who pushed for it and why, and then also talk about which countries benefited the most. So it says the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, also called the Hart-Celler Act, is one of the most consequential laws in U.S. history, and it's often misunderstood. Let's really unpack who pushed it, why it passed, what it was meant to do, what it actually did, and who benefited the most. 1. What the 1965 Act replaced. Context matters. Before 1965, U.S. immigration was governed by the 1924 Johnson-Reed Act, which used national origins quotas, explicitly favored Northern and Western Europe, heavily restricted Southern and Eastern Europeans, Asians had nearly total exclusion, and Africans. And it was openly designed to preserve America's existing racial composition. This system was eugenics-based, race-conscious, and unapologetic about it. By the 1960s, this system had become internationally embarrassing during the Cold War, politically inconsistent with the civil rights movement, and hard to defend morally or legally. 2. Who pushed for the Immigration Act of 1965? The key political figures were President Lyndon B. Johnson, who signed the bill into law at the Statue of Liberty, framed it as a civil rights and fairness issue, wanted to eliminate explicitly racist laws, and also wanted to strengthen America's global image versus the Soviet Union. 2, Senator Philip Hart of Michigan, a liberal Democrat, strong civil rights advocate, and co-author of the bill. 3, Congressman Emanuel Seller of New York, a Jewish immigrant background, opposed quota systems for decades, believed national origin quotas legitimized racial hierarchy. 3, why was the act pushed? The real motivations. 1, civil rights legitimacy. It says America could not credibly argue for racial equality at home and democracy abroad while maintaining immigration laws explicitly based on race. This law was meant to symbolically align immigration with civil rights reforms. So that's how civil rights was involved, is that, our international policy was not in line with our domestic civil rights policy. We could not be going overseas to tell people how they should be doing stuff when at home we had all of these issues that were race-based. And so because the two were not in sync, that's really how civil rights got involved. That's how civil rights was used as a way to push that act. Number 2, Cold War strategy. The US was competing with the USSR for influence in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Racially discriminatory immigration laws undermined US diplomacy, were frequently cited by Soviet propaganda, and removing racial quotas helped the US claim moral high ground. So this was more really about our competition with Russia at the time and wanting to be the leaders of the world, because we couldn't put ourselves up as the leaders of the world with immigration laws that were racist, that were seen as racist. So the fact that this immigration law was pushed really had nothing to do with Black Americans pushing to open up immigration to Black countries. It had nothing to do with that. It was really more about American politicians and posturing or positioning America as the leader of the world, and that's not possible if we had racist immigration laws. Number 3, political miscalculation. Very important. Many supporters did not believe the law would dramatically change U.S. demographics. Ted Kennedy famously said the bill would, quote, not flood our cities with immigrants, and, quote, not upset the ethnic mix of America. That turned out to be very wrong. So even the supporters of the bill didn't really think that it was going to bring in a lot of people. Most of the people that supported the bill just supported it for the visual effect, for aesthetics, if you will, or for the optics. But they didn't think that they were really gonna bring in all of these immigrants. And if Black people at the time, because it did mention Ted Kennedy, who was a Democrat, and if Black people at the time supported the bill, I think they kind of had that same view throughout their support of it. Number 4, what the Immigration Act of 1965 actually did. What it eliminated. It eliminated national origin quotas and explicit racial exclusions. What it replaced them with. A preference system based on family reunification, employment skills, refugees, and asylees. This system appeared neutral, but had unequal starting points. Number 5, the hidden structural advantage. Chain migration. Family reunification became the dominant pathway. This meant groups with existing immigrant footholds could multiply rapidly. One migrant could sponsor his spouse, children, parents, siblings, who then sponsor more relatives. This compounding effect favored groups that already had transnational networks, recent migration history, and strong remittance cultures. Number 6, which countries benefited the most? The biggest beneficiaries overall. Latin America. Mexico was the largest beneficiary by far, El Salvador, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Cuba. Why? Because of geographic proximity, labor demand, family reunification, and refugee policies. So if FBA was the driving force behind that Immigration Act, behind this act, if FBA was the driving force, they were pushing to get Latinos here, because Latinos were the main beneficiaries of this act, which is a hint that FBA really wasn't behind this. Because if they were, then they're the reason why all these Latinos were able to come here, not the Blacks, because we haven't seen where Blacks are the beneficiaries yet. The second group that benefited the most were Asians, a massive shift. Before 1965, Asians were nearly excluded. After 1965, Asian immigration exploded. The top beneficiaries are India, China, Philippines, Vietnam, and Korea, especially through skilled worker visas, STEM pipelines, medical professions, and family sponsorship. Next is the Caribbean: Jamaica, Haiti, Trinidad and Tobago, Dominican Republic, and Guyana. They benefited through family reunification, refugee or asylum pathways, and English language advantage. And lastly, Africa, which had a later growth from Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia, and Kenya. African immigration grew more slowly at first, but accelerated after the 1980s and 90s. So, again, if FBA was the one that made that immigration law possible to get Black immigrants here, then they're going to have some explaining to do. How come that act got more Latinos and Asians here than Black immigrants? So that's a hint that they really were not behind this act. And that this claim of theirs that they made it possible for Black immigrants to come here does not hold water. Who benefited the least? Black Americans descended from U.S. slavery. ChatGPT says Black Americans benefited the least from the 1965 Immigration Act, the act that they pushed for, the act that, according to them, they pushed for and made possible. They benefited the least from. It says Black Americans descended from U.S. slavery are not immigrants. They had no family reunification advantage. They had no immigration-based development pipeline and are still dealing with post-Jim Crow structural damage. The law did nothing to address historical exclusion, wealth theft, or caste status. So again, how were they the ones responsible for this act if they benefited the least from it? If them and the people that they said they did it for benefited the least, how were they the driving force behind it? It just doesn't make sense. Number 7, the unspoken trade-off. The 1965 Act removed race from immigration law, but did not remove race from American society. As a result, immigrants arrived into systems Black Americans had fought to open, without having endured the original exclusions, creating tensions over resources, representation, narrative ownership. This is where modern debates over FBA delineation, reparations, DEI categories start to make historical sense. Without the 1965 Act, modern America's demographic profile would look radically different. The post-1965 immigrant boom wouldn't exist, and many diaspora dynamics wouldn't exist in their current form. So the bottom line is that the Immigration Act of 1965 was morally motivated, politically strategic, structurally naive, and demographically transformative. It ended race-based exclusion, but it did not repair race-based damage. That unresolved contradiction is still playing out today. So if FBA were really the ones fighting for this bill, it sorely backfired. Or stuff happened that they didn't foresee. Because they're the main ones today complaining about immigration, or one of the main groups complaining about immigration and how badly it's affected them. So either they didn't foresee any of this and they didn't think through what the hell they were doing or supporting, or they are not the ones behind this. And I think it's more of the latter, where they are not the ones who made this Immigration Act possible. The next question I asked, the piece of what it said was interesting. It said, I asked, what systems did immigrants enter that Black Americans fought to open? And it says, this is a very important question, and it gets to the heart of why post-1965 dynamics feel tense even when no one is doing anything wrong individually. When immigrants arrived, especially after 1965, they entered systems that Black Americans had spent a century fighting, bleeding, litigating, and dying to open. Those systems were not open by default. They were forced open. So I guess this is more of what FBA is talking about. And well, actually, they do speak about this as well. So it's good that we can talk about this and what systems they're claiming Black immigrants, when they come here, are taking advantage of, that are open off of their hard work. So I think it's pretty clear that the immigration law itself was not their work. But immigrants coming and entering certain systems, the systems that immigrants entered, according to ChatGPT, is more of their work. So let's talk a little more about that. So ChatGPT says it's going to break it down system by system. 1, legal citizenship and equal protection. What Black Americans fought for. The 14th Amendment from 1868, which was birthright citizenship, equal protection under the law, overturning Black codes, Jim Crow laws, racialized courts, and policing. This took Reconstruction, 100 years of court battles, civil rights movement, and federal enforcement. What immigrants entered was a legal framework where citizenship was normalized, courts formally recognized racial discrimination as illegal, and federal law, at least on paper, protected civil rights. Immigrants did not enter the U.S. as rightless people the way Black Americans once did. And this is no immigrant at all. This includes those Latinos and Asians as well. So those systems that they're talking about are systems that European immigrants, Latino, Asian immigrants, and Black immigrants all came in and took advantage of. So this isn't just Black immigrants doing this stuff or taking advantage of these rights, these American rights, which were created throughout American history. But all people are taking advantage of those. Number 2, voting rights and political access. What Black Americans fought for. The 15th Amendment, Voting Rights Act of 1965, protection from poll taxes, literacy tests, violence, and intimidation. People were beaten, murdered, jailed for trying to vote. What immigrants entered. A country where naturalized citizens could vote, voting discrimination was federally outlawed, and majority Black districts already existed. Immigrants entered after voting rights had been secured. All right, and again, this is what all immigrants took advantage of, not just the Black immigrants. It's not as if before the 15th Amendment, Latinos and Asians could easily come in and get citizenship and vote. They couldn't. So again, this is what all immigrants came in and took advantage of. And, and I'm not 100% convinced that this was all on the backs of Black people. There were white people fighting for these laws as well. The same way the abolition movement was filled with white folks, is the same way the 14th Amendment and 15th Amendment and getting those bills passed were all fought for by white folks as well, not just Black folks. And also, there were Caribbeans here as well. There were Caribbean Blacks here. There were African Blacks here who were absolutely instrumental in the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement, a lot of it, even the Black Power movement, all of this were African people and Caribbean people were certainly played a large role, or played a substantial role in those movements. Creating these systems. Let's remember Marcus Garvey was here in the 20s. Marcus Garvey was a Black leader in America in the 20s. So in 1965, there were many immigrant leaders also active in that civil rights movement, in leadership roles. And so all of these systems that were opened, desegregation of schools, voting rights acts being passed, all of these things, African and Caribbean immigrants were also a part of. So when it says Black people in America made these systems possible, those Black people, there are Black immigrants thrown in there as well, who were a part of that struggle. Number 3, public education and desegregation. What Black Americans fought for. Brown versus Board of Ed, desegregation of K-12 schools and universities, access to public funding, curriculum, credentials. Black students faced armed guards, mobs, National Guard deployments. But what immigrants entered were desegregated public schools, public universities open to non-whites, financial aid structures already in place. Many immigrant families entered directly into integrated school systems that Black Americans forced open. But again, let's be clear. When ChatGPT says immigrants came here into those systems that Black Americans forced open, it's talking about immigrants after 1965, right? But there were immigrants here from the beginning. From the beginning of America, there were immigrants here helping to create those systems. And when it says the systems that Black Americans created, it's counting Caribbean and African immigrants among the Black Americans. Because again, remember, Marcus Garvey was in the 20s. The 1965 Act was, 1965. So there were immigrants here already helping to create those systems. I understand that the immigrant population boomed after 65. But there were immigrants here helping with the creation of those systems. And we should be clear on that. So it wasn't just Black Americans, because white folks helped to create those systems, and Caribbean people that were here helped to create those systems as well. Number 4, employment and labor protections. What Black Americans fought for. Inclusion in minimum wage laws, union protections, anti-discrimination hiring practices, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Originally, Black-dominated jobs were excluded from New Deal protections. When immigrants entered, jobs legally protected against racial discrimination, credential-based hiring instead of explicit racial bans, and government enforcement agencies like the EEOC. They entered a labor market already civil rights regulated. But again, it's still important to remember that the civil rights movement itself was about America's international standing. And it was more than just Black people fighting for these things. There were American politicians, white American politicians, who believed that America would be more competitive internationally or have the moral high ground internationally to be the leaders of the free world by allowing the civil rights movement to prosper and for opening these systems. So the opening of these systems, in my view, is not just based on the work of Black Americans, the same way that 1965 Civil Rights Act, the immigration law, was not just based on Black Americans. It's the same way all of these systems that's being referred to, which are all tied to civil rights, are all also about America's position or the way people viewed America, the way other countries viewed America, and America wanting to be that standard of morality. Number 5, housing and fair lending. What Black Americans fought for: Fair Housing Act, the end of redlining, racial covenants, FHA discrimination. Black families were blocked from wealth-building neighborhoods, denied mortgages, and forced into contract buying. When immigrants entered, a housing market where discrimination was illegal, immigrant status was not equal to racial ineligibility, and FHA or VA structures existed. Even if discrimination persisted, the legal door was open. But again, this was not just Black Americans fighting for these things. This was also white folks like Hart-Celler. And these politicians were also pushing for these systems to be open. A lot of the times, Black people were just the beneficiaries of them. The fact that they're the beneficiaries of them does not mean that they were the ones fighting for them. Number 6, public accommodations and everyday life. What Black Americans fought for: the right to eat in restaurants, stay in hotels, use public facilities, and end of whites-only signs. This involves sit-ins, arrests, violence. When immigrants entered was a country where segregation was illegal, business could not legally exclude customers, and they never had to fight this battle. And, this reminds me of the Black Lives Matter movement. I think ChatGPT wants us to think that this was all of this work was being done by Black folks. But the Black Lives Matter movement was filled with white folks. When you turn on your TV and looked at those Black Lives Matter marches, you'll see more white folks than Black folks. So the same way the abolition movement was possibly more white folks than Black folks, it's the same way the opening of these systems as well was likely more white folks than Black folks. And that the same way immigrants are beneficiaries of these systems, so were Black folks for the most part, I think. Number 7, higher education access and DEI infrastructure. What Black Americans fought for: affirmative action, diversity mandates, Title VI enforcement, minority recruitment. These frameworks were created to address Black exclusion. The fact that they were created to address Black exclusion doesn't mean that it was just Black folks fighting for them. What immigrants entered: DEI systems already built, minority categories already defined, institutional incentives to recruit quote-unquote diverse students. This is where category compression happens. Different histories, same box. Number 8, federal welfare and social programs. What Black Americans fought for: inclusion in Social Security, GI Bill, Medicaid and Medicare, end of racial exclusions and benefits. What immigrants entered were programs already universalized, eligibility based on status and not race, and bureaucracies legally barred from racial discrimination. Number 9, cultural legitimacy and narrative space. What Black Americans fought for: recognition as full Americans, cultural contributors, rights-bearing citizens. This required civil rights, Black power, cultural movements. What immigrants entered: a society where Black culture was already normalized, multiculturalism was institutionalized, and diversity was valorized. They entered after Black Americans made America plural. And again, Black America made America plural because Black America was plural. There were Caribbean Blacks and African Blacks mixed into Black America pre-1965. So the civil rights movement, there were Caribbeans and Africans involved in the civil rights movement. We have to know that. The Black Power movement, there were certainly Black Caribbeans and Africans involved in the Black Power movement. Multiculturalism, diversity. No one can really believe that Black America or FBA are the only ones that made America multicultural and diverse and pushed for those things as values, Black America, Black America created those things or helped to create those things. Not FBA, Black America. Black America at that time was multicultural. And it was the multicultural parts of it that pushed for more multiculturalism and more diversity. Number 10, the core reality, the part people avoid. Immigrants did not, quote unquote, take these systems from Black Americans, but they did not have to fight to open them. They benefited from battles they didn't endure, and the systems were never repaired for the people who opened them. That's the unresolved tension. And it's an unresolved tension because FBA treat immigrants, especially Black immigrants, as if they actually did take those systems away from them. And that's the heart of the tension. That's why they call us tethers. That's exactly why they call us tethers, or the main why of why they call us tethers. Or if that's not the main reason why they call us tethers, it is absolutely the main reason why they want to delineate, because they believe we take those systems away from them. And they believe that once they delineate, those systems will be returned to them. And, as for this idea that immigrants didn't fight to open the systems that I guess have been kept away from FBA, and that, they benefit from battles that they didn't endure. Again, I think it's important to remember that there were immigrants pre-1965. There were immigrants in the Black struggle since the Black struggle in America began. On a certain level, the Black struggle has always been seen as a global struggle against white supremacy. And the fight in America has been fought on many levels by a lot of different people, including Africans and Caribbean people. And the fight to open those systems, in America has been a part of the fight against white supremacy. And Caribbean people have been a part of that fight. The Black Power movement was a movement that was global, and Black Power couldn't have been real without the unification of Black people, because that's what gave Black people the majority. And so that was the heart of Black Power, was the unification of Black people. When we understand that it's a struggle against white supremacy, we're reminded that white supremacy is global, or has been global, and that whether you're in Africa or the Caribbean or the Americas, you're gonna be affected by white supremacy. And so to say it's a harm that immigrants have not endured, especially when you're speaking to Black immigrants, to say it's something they have not endured, if you believe that this white supremacy is real. Imagine the white in your flag is about white supremacy, and you believe it's a global phenomenon. So how can you now, or how can they now say that this is a harm, that white supremacy is a harm that we haven't endured, that certain immigrants have not endured? Next question I asked, did Black Americans support the 1965 Act? Were they unaware of these negative consequences? Were they unaware that the systems they were opening, in particular the Civil Rights Act of 1965, were they aware that these immigrants were going to come here and kind of take their spot, if you will? Were they aware that these systems they were opening weren't going to be repaired for themselves? that these immigrants were just going to replace them. So again, the question was, did Blacks support the 1965 Act, and were they unaware of these negative consequences? And it says, yes, most Black American leaders and civil rights organizations did support the Immigration Act of 1965. And no, they were largely unaware of the long-term structural consequences that would emerge. That combination matters. Let's break this down carefully and honestly without hindsight bias. Number one, did Black Americans support the 1965 Act? Short answer, yes, overwhelmingly, at the leadership level. Major Black civil rights organizations either supported the bill or did not oppose it, including NAACP, National Urban League, SCLC, which was Martin Luther King's organization, and Black members of Congress. Why? Because the law was framed and genuinely understood at the time as a civil rights victory. Two, why did Black leaders support it? One, it removed explicitly racist immigration law. The pre-1965 system excluded Africans and Asians almost entirely. It was openly based on racial hierarchy, and it echoed the same logic as Jim Crow. To Black Americans in the 1960s, race-based law is immoral everywhere or nowhere. Supporting the bill was consistent with the broader fight against legalized racism. Two, it was linked symbolically to the civil rights movement. The act passed the same year as the Voting Rights Act. It passed under LBJ, who was seen as the most pro-Black president since Lincoln, and as part of the Great Society reforms. Opposing it would have felt like undermining the civil rights moral coalition, defending a racist law simply because it didn't target Black Americans directly. Three, Black Americans were focused on survival and inclusion. In 1965, Black Americans were fighting for physical safety, voting access, desegregation, employment rights, and housing access. Immigration policy was not viewed as a competing issue. No one was thinking, how will this reshape Black political representation in 40 years? What happens if our remedial category expands globally? That kind of second-order structural analysis was rare and frankly unrealistic at the time. Three, were Black Americans aware of the potential negative consequences? In general, no. And here's why. The law was sold as demographically neutral. Even its white sponsors believed or claimed it would have minimal impact. Ted Kennedy said the bill would not flood the country, not change America's ethnic composition. If the authors themselves underestimated its impact, Black leaders were unlikely to foresee it. Two, chain migration effects were not fully understood. The long-term compounding effect of family reunification was not modeled, it was not debated publicly, and it was not explained as a structural multiplier. At the time, it sounded benign, keep families together, not transformative. Three, Black Americans did not see immigration as a zero-sum system yet. In 1965, Black Americans were still excluded from power, underrepresented, and fighting to access basic institutions. The idea that immigration would later intersect with DEI, minority contracting, representation, and protected class law was not yet visible. Those systems either did not exist yet or were just forming. Four, a crucial point people avoid. Black Americans did not consent to having their remedial category globalized. They supported ending racist immigration law. They did not debate whether descendants of U.S. slavery should remain a distinct remedial class, whether immigration policy should interact with civil rights remedies, and whether numerical replacement would affect political leverage. Those questions were never posed to them. Five, was there any Black opposition or caution? Very little. And where it existed, it was muted. Why? Immigration was not framed as a Black issue. Questioning it risked being labeled anti-civil rights. Black leaders were politically dependent on liberal coalitions. This created a silencing effect, not malice. Number 6, the tragic irony. Black Americans helped dismantle race-based exclusion, helped make America a multiracial democracy, and opened institutions through sacrifice. But their own historical injuries were never repaired. Their category later became administratively diluted, and their moral victory became a structural vulnerability. That outcome was unintended and not chosen. The main thing it's bringing across here is that, or as I understand it, is that Black Americans were supporting the Civil Rights Act or the immigration law without really being aware of how it was going to affect them. They weren't aware that all these Black immigrants would become lumped in with them in their census category as all Black people. And that, the effects of that was going to be what it was going to be. They weren't aware of any of these things. They were pretty much just supporting the immigration law because it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. It was a civil rights law. And the people that were pushing for those people, the people they trusted, their white politicians told them that this was not going to affect them in the ways that they claim they're being affected by it. So they supported it without really knowing what was to become of it. Number 7, bottom line, very important. Black Americans did not make a mistake. They acted morally, acted consistently, acted under extreme constraints, acted without access to long-term demographic forecasting. The problem is not that they supported the 1965 Act. The problem is that America treated immigration reform as a substitute for racial repair, and then acted as if the original debt was settled. It wasn't. America treated immigration reform as a substitute for racial repair, and then acted as if the original debt was settled. So they brought in all of these immigrants and then said, look at what we're doing for all of these non-white immigrants, so we have no more debt to our black American citizens. And, I guess that is the narrative. The next question I asked, you said immigration was not framed as a Black issue. Does that mean Black Americans did not fight for it, but they didn't fight against it either? And it says, yes, that's exactly what it means. And saying it plainly actually clears up a lot of confusion. Black Americans did not fight for the Immigration Act of 1965 as a Black demand, and they didn't fight against it either. They stood aside morally in support, but they were not the driving force. And that's key for me. They were not the driving force of it. They supported it because it was packaged as part of their civil rights movement, but they were not the driving force, which explains why it was something that happened to them. They didn't cause it, but it was stuff happened to them as a result. But they are not the driving force of this. So when they say they're the ones that made it possible for us to come here, that's not true at all. They are not the ones that made the 1965 Immigration Act possible. All they did was support it morally. And had they known the effects of it, I doubt they would have supported it. They would not have. Can we say, as ChatGPT said, that they helped in creating these systems that immigrants came in and took advantage of? Yes, we can say that. But were they the driving force behind the 1965 Act and getting non-white immigrants here? No, they were not the driving force. The driving force are more likely the same people That's the driving force behind what's going on today with immigration. White liberals. But let's read on some more. It says, let's be precise. 1. What not framed as a black issue actually means. When I say immigration was not framed as a black issue, I mean it was not a demand coming out of black mass movements. It was not organized around black material interests. It was not debated inside black communities as a trade-off question. It was not something people marched, bled, or boycotted for. So that, I think, kills their talking point. Black Americans are not responsible for the 1965 immigration law. They are just not. Compare that to voting rights, desegregation, fair housing, and employment access. Those were black issues, explicitly, urgently, existentially. Immigration reform was not. So blacks were fighting for voting rights, for desegregation, for fair housing and unemployment access for themselves. Black folks were fighting for themselves. They were not fighting for immigrants. They supported immigrants coming here because they saw it as a civil rights thing. They may have related to it, and it was similar to the fights they were going through, so they supported it. But they weren't out there fighting for it. Don't let them tell you that. 2. Who actually fought for the 1965 Act? And this should be interesting. It says the push came primarily from white liberal politicians. Absolutely. White liberal politicians. Those same people, I think, that were also fighting to open those systems that it's giving black people the credit for. You know, black people were fighting for those things as well, but not by themselves. Those same white liberal politicians were there with them, fighting for desegregation, fighting for voting rights, fighting for the 14th Amendment, fighting for abolition. There has never been any system open for black folks that white folks weren't at the forefront of fighting for. So again, white liberals, ethnic European groups harmed by the old quotas, such as Italians, Jews, Greeks, Poles, Cold War strategists, business interests needing labor, and human rights advocates focused on symbolism. Black organizations supported the bill as a matter of principle, not as a campaign priority. There were no black-led immigration marches, no black immigration boycotts, no black immigration mass arrests, no immigration equivalent of Selma or Birmingham. That matters. So, this was done by white folks. The immigration law of 1965 was pushed by white folks and fought for by white folks. The same white folks, I think, that were alongside black folks fighting to open those systems that black folks took advantage of. Those same people that fought to open systems that black Americans took advantage of are those same white folks that fought to open immigration so that other people could come here and take advantage of those systems. Number 3, why black Americans didn't fight against it. 3 main reasons. Fighting it would have meant defending a racist law. Opposing the bill would have meant arguing to keep race-based quotas, aligning with segregationists, undermining civil rights legitimacy. That was not politically or morally viable. Number 2, black Americans were fighting for survival. In 1965, people were being murdered for voting. Children were integrating schools under armed guard. Police brutality was unchecked. Economic exclusion was severe. Immigration was not urgent. by comparison. 3, the law was presented as symbolic cleanup. It was sold as removing embarrassing racism from the books, a technical reform, a moral housekeeping issue, not as a demographic or structural transformation, so there was no clear reason to oppose it. What support actually looked like? This is important. Support was elite-level endorsements, non-opposition, moral alignment, and silence rather than mobilization. That's very different from fighting for something. So that's what Black support at the time looked like. Elite endorsements, non-opposition, moral alignment, and silence. They just didn't speak against it. And that type of support is not what makes the immigration law happen. That's not the support that made it happen. And that's not the force that made it happen. That's not fighting for something, as ChatGPT put it. Black Americans did not draft the bill, did not control its architecture, did not define its priorities, and did not anticipate its interaction with future policies. So they didn't see any of this. And who else didn't see any of this? Those Black immigrants that were coming in here. Those Black immigrants coming in here didn't see it as, oh, we're going in there to take over Black people. If Black people didn't see it as that, why would immigrants see it as that? Why would they? So to now accuse immigrants of coming here to take advantage of this stuff or to take over for the stuff that they created is just foolishness. And to benefit off of their hard work is just foolishness. Number 5, the key distinction people miss. There's a big difference between we demand this policy because it serves our group's interests and we support this policy because opposing it would contradict our values. Black Americans did the second, not the first. So Black Americans are not responsible for the 1965 immigration law in any way. If they were smart, they would have opposed it. If they were forward-leaning or if they had any vision into the future, they would have opposed it. But they weren't paying attention, I guess. Why this distinction matters today? Because it means Black Americans did not choose to globalize their remedial category. They did not trade immigration for civil rights. They did not consent to dilution of representation, and they did not design the post-1965 system. They simply did not block it. This is not authorship. And if it's not authorship, why are they trying to take authorship? This is my issue, is that they're trying to take credit for authoring this bill and for making it possible for people to come here. That is just ridiculous. They're saying they're the ones that made it possible for immigrants to come here and take advantage of those systems. According to ChatGPT, they didn't know that was going to happen. They didn't realize that immigrants were going to come here and take advantage of the system in their place, and that the immigrant Black taking advantage of the system was going to count for these white liberals as this is our repair for what we did to Black people in America. They knew nothing of that. They knew none of that. Number 7, or finally, it says, a clean way to say it is Black Americans fought to end racist laws everywhere. Immigration reform was not their fight, but they did not stand in the way of justice for others. What they did not agree to was having their unfinished repair treated as complete. But Black Americans are more angry at Black immigrants than any other immigrant. They don't seem to be as angry at the Latino immigrants or Asian immigrants because they don't have a special word for them. They only have a special word, tether, for Black immigrants. Even though Latino immigrants come in and take advantage of all those same systems that they created, public housing, public schools, welfare system, Latinos certainly come here and take advantage of those. Asians come here and take advantage of those. Europeans from South and Eastern Europe came in and took advantage of those. But Black Americans don't have a special name for them. The only ones that are tethers are the Black immigrants. Black immigrants are the only ones they have disdain for coming in and doing exactly what all other immigrant groups did, take advantage of systems that were here. Regardless of who created those systems, they came to take advantage of systems that were here. So, as a quick summary, did Black Americans create those systems that immigrants came here to take advantage of? I would say they helped to create them. I would say those systems were created because of the discrimination that Black folks here were experiencing. And I think that they fought for those systems to be created. They fought for those systems to be created, but those systems were created by them same white liberals that fought for the Voting Rights Act, and by Cold War strategists, by people who wanted America to be seen as the moral light of the world. That's a major part of the reason of why these systems were created. And by just human rights advocates, but mainly by white folks, by these same white folks. Those are the ones that created those systems. Did Black folks help to create them? Yes. But they didn't create them on their own. Did Black Americans fight for and create the immigration law of 1965, which is really what we're here to talk about? Absolutely not. No. All they did was support it. And by support it, I mean they didn't oppose it. They didn't march for it. They didn't call for it. They just didn't oppose it. That's probably, the people that supported it were the Black politicians who were voting in Congress, may have voted for it because their leadership was telling them to vote for it, that it wasn't going to affect them in the ways that it ended up affecting them. But as a mass, Black people in America did not fight for this law, this immigration law. So I think that kind of, destroys this talking point of theirs, that they're the ones that made it possible for us to come here. That's just not true. Are they the ones that made it possible for these systems to be created? That's more possibly true, because they're the ones that were being discriminated against. But are they the ones that created those systems? No. The fact that you're the reason a system was created doesn't mean you created it. And I think they get confused with the two. But our public school system, our welfare system, our public education system, these were not created by Black people. They may have been created as a response to include Black people, but they were not created by Black folks. And if all immigrants came here to take advantage of these systems, why is it that Black Americans only have disdain for Black immigrants? Why is it that they've only come up with a word for Black immigrants? Is it because Black immigrants are the only ones that's lumped in with them on the census as part of the Black African American race, and because they're the only ones lumped in, then they are the ones that is preventing them from being put in a remedial class all their own? Is that the reason why they have this disdain for Black immigrants? Well, they should be reminded that they're the ones that were pushing for this in the first place. It was their idea to have Black and African Americans all under one umbrella, because at the time, it was in their self-interest to have that. The reason all Black people are piled together was to create a political constituency. That's the main reason. Black Americans also were Pan-Africanists who also pushed to be classed together with all Black people. Being classed together with all Black people was seen as a way to fight white supremacy. And Black people were in favor of it when it was something useful to them, when they thought of it as something useful to them. But again, just like the immigration law, things happen that they didn't foresee. They support something, and then when it doesn't turn out the way they thought about it, or when they realize they didn't think about what was going to happen, they start lashing out against the people that they were supporting, or the movement that they supported. Once they realize that it's not working out in their favor, they start lashing out. But they're the ones that were pushing for these things. And they're the ones that are going to have to take responsibility for the fact that they supported these things. And they should also realize that Black immigrants aren't doing anything differently than what all other immigrants are doing, trying to take advantage of systems that are created here. But I think I've said enough for this video. I think I've said enough. If you like the video, like the video. If you don't like the video, leave a comment. Tell me why you don't like the video. Either way, like or dislike. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. And you done know. We're going to catch you on the next one. Peace.
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. Bad mind them out, you want hygiene a tweet. That's why enough of them, rifle a beat. Everybody want big ups and want to drive in a Jeep. Every day I'm at the ball when she buy in a read. Not even 5 days, you can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet. But keep a eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go late. Them never yet plant and not try figure rape. Bigger heads where you fight for the sake. Now cater about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle with some meat. The system will slide where you fit.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life, ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want it though. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life, ghetto life. This a real ghetto life, ghetto life. Yeah. Everybody just a pre-success. When me looking at the street, you me see enough stress. Them all a fight for who reach up next. Everybody want floss and a beat up chest. Juvenile in a them teen love sex. Them a pre the fast money, them no need subjects. And if you're unfortunate, please don't vex. I saw the thing said cause the streets don't rest.
Inna the streets where we born and grow. Only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, talk about ghetto life, ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want it though. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life, this a real ghetto life, ghetto life. Yeah. It's all about life in the street. People are suffer, try survive in the heat. Bad mind them out, you want hygiene a tweet. That's why enough of them, rifle a beat. Everybody want the ghost, I want fi drive in a Jeep. Every day I'm at the ball when she buy in a read. Not even 5 wheels, we can't find for the week. Me no see no changes, the same cycle repeat. Give thanks cause life it's a sweet, but keep a eye open every time you go sleep. Cause mankind jealous and them idle go late. Them never yet plant and not try figure rape. Bigger heads where you fight for the seed. Now care about the future nor the child where you creep. Them a pray the fat Kyle we sonate. The system will slide where you fit.
In the streets where we born and grow, only Jah know and nobody know.
When we talk about ghetto life, ghetto life. Talk about ghetto life, ghetto life.
Everybody a priest say them want the dough. That's why them a speed and they pan the go.
Cause this a real ghetto life, ghetto life. This a real ghetto life, ghetto life. Yeah, 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 yeah.